Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Lamed Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Elisha Gray in loving memory of Gidi Nachshon, Yoel Melech ben Moshe B'Sara, on his 11th year at Zeit. Gidi was a true tzaddik and gifted teacher who shared his deep love of Torah in Israel, which I am grateful to have inherited. I feel certain it would bring him much joy to see me studying Daf Yomi in the special Hadran community. Today's daf is sponsored by Miriam Darchi in loving memory of Aaron Shimon ben David and Malkat Cyril. We're going to get started. We saw at the end of yesterday's daf a bunch of statements of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel about mezuza. Okay, I'm going to point out that we're going to talk about the issue of sakana again in mezuza, and Din and Daf went up yesterday with Alana Steinhain's shir. If you haven't, also I mentioned yesterday already about flashback about mezuza, and Alana's shir also about mezuza, really grappling with the two very different approaches about what the dangers the mezuza is protecting us from. And we'll see it again in today's daf, and as Alana goes off in depth, maybe we'll mention a little bit of it in class, but definite recommended listening to relating to the daf. Also, if I'm already talking about extra content, since there's stuff that's on tomorrow's daf that I didn't mention in class because I recorded it before because it's the Shabbat daf. At the end of tomorrow's daf, we're going to get to the very famous machloket Rashi Rabbeinu Tam about tefillin. You know, there's people who wear two sets of tefillin, Rashi tefillin, Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. So we're going to end tomorrow's shir with the issue with the machloket between them. And there's a machloket with a bunch of others besides. I don't know if there's people who wear more than two sets of tefillin, but there's more than a two-way machloket there. And Gefet this week is on that topic. Hopefully it'll go up. It went up in Hebrew. Hopefully it'll go up today, if not by Sunday, in English. And it's an excellent, first of all, there's good visuals there, and it's an excellent in-depth understanding of the big, very famous machloket, and why we end up also why people do wear two sets of tefillin. And anyway, that's a also good, interesting topic. Okay, let's get started with, I know Friday's not always the easiest day. On the other hand, if you're cooking for Shabbat, you can always just put it on and listen while you're cooking. Okay. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel a bunch of halachot, like if you write it like a letter, it's no good. If you hang it on the stick, remember, and then it could hit you. We got into the dangers there. What kind of danger are we talking about? We talked about if you have to put it inside the mashkof, inside the doorpost, right, which we said isn't that obvious. Where else are you going to put it? They said, well, since Rava said, which we're actually going to come back to today, we'll start with that now. Since Rava had said, which we read this yesterday at the top of our daf now, that you have to put the mezuzah in the tefach, and within a handbreadth of the part of the doorpost that's facing the Reshut Rabim. Today we'll see why. Kama demarchake ma'ale. You might have thought maybe even put it closer to Reshut Rabim, like maybe on the side of the wall and not even in the doorpost. Kamash, and that's why Rav Yehuda had to come and tell us, no, you can't do it there. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, ketava al shni dapim psula. If you write it on, okay, this is whether it means two columns with a big space in the middle, or maybe it means two separate parchments. It's disqualified. Meitive, because remember the pim, okay, comes up meaning sometimes columns, sometimes meaning pages, okay, different parchments. So meitive, they say, wait, but this contradicts the following source. Kitaval shnei dapim v'nicha b'shnei sippin psula. If you wrote it on two dapim, but you put it on, let's say you're a doorpost, now you have to. Part of what's going to be very difficult, okay, today's stuff is going to be very interesting because there's a lot of practical things and things that we know to be true about mezuza that you're going to see where they come from, particularly one very interesting one. Just like tomorrow, you're going to see about this Rashi Rabbeinu Tam and where it comes from. So those are always very interesting. What's going to be complicated about today's stuff is that we're going to have a bunch of sections that talk about this reality that we don't live in, or we don't know what they're talking about, or they're talking about all these words and that mean things to them, which not only do we not understand, also the early Rishonim even didn't understand, and even we're going to see sugyot where the people in the Gemara didn't understand. They say, what is this? And then they try to explain it, but already, it becomes, what ends up happening is it's open to a lot of parshanut, and then it makes it harder for us to say, oh, this is exactly what the Gemara means, because it's not so clear what the Gemara means. So we're going to have a lot of that today because we're dealing with a topic that's all about what we call in Hebrew realia, about it's obviously taken from an English word, but it's about the reality of their times, and we weren't living then. We don't have enough evidence of the way all these things work. But this seems to be talking about, you have a wide, right? Imagine you have an arch. That's always the easiest way to remember these things. They had a lot of arches in those days, which we've seen from archaeology and, old buildings. A lot of arches. Now, the whole arch necessarily is not the doorpost, right? They would put like a wooden piece or something, right? A wooden, to basically create a doorpost. So if you had two of those within the doorpost, within the whole area, and then you put one parchment on one and one parchment on the other, it's disqualified. Psula. That's what it means. Shnei dapim al shnei sippin. Sippin are like these wooden posts. So now they say, what does it seem to infer though? You can't put two parchments on two posts, but you could theoretically have a safechad shira. It sounds like if it was all on one post, it would be okay, right? That's what it sounds like. And that goes against what we just said. You can't have it on two different parchments, or perhaps it even means two columns in a parchment with a big space in between, because then you could just cut and then end up doing it on two. So anyway, what do they answer? When it said, if you write it on two dapim and put it on two posts, they didn't really mean to put it on two posts. Like, who's got two posts on it, right? The whole thing seemed a little weird reality-wise. What they're saying is, if you write it on two parchments or on two columns, and it could theoretically be put on two different posts. By the way, the other way to say two posts is right and left, but nobody thinks that because, right, on the two posts of the door, separately, nobody thinks that because that's obviously no good because the mezuza obviously has to be on the right. But what they really meant was, since it could theoretically have been put, if you wanted, you could have separated them and put them on two posts, that's disqualified, okay? So now there's no inference that contradicts our situation, or contradicts what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. Okay, we're continuing with Rav Yehuda now. Amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, b'mezuza halech achal heker tzir. We go by the noticing of the hinge. Okay, so the Gemara says, my heker tzir, what do you mean by this? Amar Rav Adda, avakta. So Rav Adda explains it with a word that doesn't really help us very much. Avakta. Okay, what is avakta? Rashi explains in what obviously is they didn't know what a tzir was. Okay, tzir is actually a modern Hebrew word. It's actually more known to us as the word avakta, but for them, obviously, it wasn't. What it means is go by the hinge. So Rashi explains it. The chor shebu skufa, right, the hole in which, right, we basically put the hinge in, shetzir hadelet sovev bo, that the hinge circles up. What does this mean? Okay, take a door. I'm in a room right now, and where's the hinge? The hinge is on the inside of the room. So when you go to put up your mezuzah, you have to put it on the right. The right of what? There's always the question when you have a mezuzah. Is it the right? Right? It's the right side of the room you're walking into. How do you know which is the room you're walking into and which is the room you're walking out of? Right? Unless it goes into a hallway, then it's pretty obvious. What if it's two rooms? Okay, and that's what they're going to say right now. Hey chidami, what exactly is the case that they're telling you this? Because it's obvious. If I'm walking into my house, I'm obviously walking into my house. I put it on the right. Now it's true the hinge is inside of my door, but I don't need that to tell me. I know I'm going into my house. But like a petach between two houses. Let's say you have a door that goes in one house and out the other house. So which way you're going to put your mezuzah? Or like, for example, they give another example, which I don't know what the reality is. Bein bei gavre the bein nashe, the house of the men and the house of the women. Okay, I don't know what they had exactly here. Houses for men, houses for women, but they used that as an example. They obviously knew what they were talking about. And the point being, when you have a case like that, where it could go either way, you go by the hinge. Whichever room the hinge is in, that means that's the main room, okay? And that's, like I said, just look at your doors and you'll see what they mean, because if you're inside a room, the hinge is always on the inside of the room and not the outside. Can't say maybe there's no exceptions to that rule, but that's generally the way doors go. Resh Galuta bana beita. So Resh Galuta built a house. Amar le Rav Nachman kavali mezuzah. He says to Rav Nachman, put me up a mezuzah. Amar le tale dashe beresha. Okay, first of all, remember the relationship of Resh Galuta and Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was married to Yalta, the famous Yalta, who was the daughter of the Resh Galuta. So it makes sense that the Resh Galuta goes to his son-in-law for halachic issues. So he says, put up my mezuzahs. And Rav Nachman says, first you have to put up the doors. Okay, this could be one of two reasons. Either because I need to know where the hinge is. Okay, I don't know where the hinge is, so I don't know where to put it. But some of the other commentaries, or Rashi says, based on the Gemara further on today, we're going to see that the mezuzah has to be also done like sukkah, like tzitzit. We're going to see has to be what we call ta'aseh v'lo min asui. You have to create it and not have it already done and put up. The mitzvah is putting up the mezuzah in its place. You can't, what obviously was done here, the doors weren't put up yet. And he can't affix the mezuzah to the doorpost and then put up the doorpost, because it has to be ta'aseh v'lo min asui. Now this halacha is a little bit strange. We'll get to it when we get there, because there's really no pasuk that says it. In Sukkah, it says, make yourself sukkot, to ta'aseh v'lo min asui, they darshan. In Tzitzit, it says, Gedilim ta'aseh lecha. But there's no asiyah ever in mezuzah. What does it say? We know. Uchtaftam, write them, al mezuzot beitecha, on the mezuzot of your house, uvisharecha. There's no word asiyah there, but they darshan it from one of the others. Okay, they somehow get that, oh, this is similar. Okay, and that's a possible reason as to why he said, I won't put it up. Okay, moving on. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Asa'a kimin neger psula. Now we start to get into questions of reality. If you do it like a neger also has to do, it's a bolt. Now what does a bolt do? A bolt goes in the wall. So, right, we all know our mezuzahs don't go inside the wall, and they also don't go exactly horizontally. Okay, soon we're going to get to why our mezuzahs angled. Okay, an interesting thing we're going to learn today. Why do we always put the mezuzah on an angle? Why do we put it at the top third of where we put it on the wall? We'll see that as well in a little bit. Anyway, Rav says, and this time Rav Yehuda quotes Rav saying, before it was Rav Yehuda quoting Shmuel, now Rav Yehuda is quoting Rav, saying, if you do it, bolt it into the wall, it's disqualified. To which the Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? Vaha, by the way, part of the reason you realize the reality is difficult, you can see Rashi draws pictures so you understand what it looks like, right? Again, whether these are Rashi's pictures or someone drew pictures afterwards and they kind of got into the printed edition of Rashi, but there are pictures here up of how to do your mezuzah. And yes, Sephardim do it straight, and we're going to see exactly why Sephardim do it straight. Okay, we're going to see the different customs today. So, okay. Vaha ki ata Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef amar kulu mezuzah debei Rebbe ki min neger havu avidan. But wait, they say all the mezuzahs of Rebbe were like a neger. And, okay, we're going to say two things about the mezuzahs of Rebbe Yehuda Nasi. One is they were neger, and hahi petra da'al be Rebbe lebei midrasha. This doesn't connect. It's just another thing they said about Rebbe. The entrance from his house to the Beit Midrash, lo hava la mezuzah. There was no mezuzah on it. We'll get back to that one in a minute. To which they answer, lo kasha. This is not difficult. Why? Hada avida kisikta, hada avida kiistavira. These two negers were not the same. Okay, now, if you want to talk about a neger, there's two things about a neger. One is it's a bolt that goes into the wall. The other is it's horizontal. Okay? Now, you could have a mezuzah that's horizontal that's not going into the wall. It could go horizontally into the wall, perpendicular to the wall, or it could go parallel to the wall, right? Where it's horizontal, though. So, basically, they're going to say, and then they're going to talk about, again, it's very unclear what a sikta is and what an istavira is. There's many different interpretations. Okay, if we go with Rashi, the first explanation in Rashi is istavira, makom chibor hashok veharegel umadhu. It's where your leg meets your thigh, and it's vertical. That's what he's saying. Istavira is vertical. So when it said neger in one place, it actually meant vertical. And when it said neger in the other place, it meant horizontal. Okay, that's the kesikta, which is a neger of umanim, which is a bolt. Okay, so there's this debate about what istavira and what sikta means. Rashi says it means, right, so vertical is the way you do it. Horizontal is not the way you do it. Some interpretations say the opposite, and that horizontal doesn't mean horizontal going in the wall. Horizontal means horizontal on the wall. And vertical is actually the problem. The one that's vertical is not the right way to do it. So it creates a lot of confusion. We're going to read now the Shulchan Aruch, because sometimes we get practical halacha, and I just, especially in cases like this where it's something that's very noticeable to us all the time. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins very simply. We're in Yoredeya 289, Seif 6. Tzricha liyot zkufa or kala orach mezuzat hapetach v'yichavein sheyesh shma dahainu sof haglila al tzad chutz. Okay, the word shma is supposed to be on the outside. Anyway, right from while it's the sof haglila. Anyway, we're not going to get into that right now. But he says it's supposed to be standing up. Okay, this is what the Sephardim paskin, standing up completely. Okay, the length of the and the standing up on your wall, on your doorpost. But the Ramah which is the Ashkenazi psak, says v'yesh nahagu. Okay, so some people do that. Aval yesh omrim shepsula bizkifa. Some people say it's disqualified that way. Okay, that vertically is no good. Ela tzricha liot shchuva or kal lerochav mezuzat hapetach. It's supposed to be lying down, meaning horizontal. Okay, so he says some people say that. That's the Torah and the poskim in the name of Rabbeinu Tam. That's Rabbeinu Tam's interpretation. Okay, we spoke before about how Tefillin, Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam had this big debate. Also here, v'amadaktikim yotzim yedei shnehem. The ones who are careful try to do both. And what do? What's the compromise between vertical, horizontal, angled? Okay, uba alachson. V'chein ra'ui linhog. The Rama says, and this is what we should do. V'chein noagim b'midinot elu. Okay, and basically he says this is the minhag. Okay, so the minhag Ashkenaz of doing it at an angle came from here, and the Sfarad came from the Rambam, from the Shulchan Aruch's interpretation. Okay, which goes by vertical. So there you have a very interesting debate that is all about how to understand the Gemara. Right? That's what I find interesting, when the Gemara could be interpreted in many different ways, and then some take it one way, some take it another way. And then that affects practical around halacha. Okay, now they say, what about the other point that he made? He said that the entrance from Rebbe's house to the Beit Midrash didn't have a mezuzah. Imi, could that really be true? We see in Rav Huna, his house opens to the Beit Midrash, and there is a mezuzah there. Hahu ragil hava da'amar Rav Yehuda amarav b'mezuzah halach achar haragil. There must have been a difference between the usage of Rebbe's entrance to his house from the Beit Midrash and from Rav Huna's. Okay, first of all, there's a whole question. It sounds like we're talking about a mezuzah to the Beit Midrash. And there's sugya to talk about a Beit Midrash doesn't need a mezuzah. So what are we even talking about? That's a good question. Okay, some people think we're talking about the entrance to the house, and that Rebbe was the only one who used that, but his house had a different entrance, which most people use. And that's halach achar ragil. If nobody else uses it except for Rebbe, who sometimes used it from the Beit Midrash to his house, then it doesn't actually need a mezuzah. Whereas Rav Huda's entrance from the Beit Midrash to his house had different usage. That's why it says a kol achar ragil, what normally is done. And because he used it a lot, and other people used it, and he wasn't the only one, then it became an entrance, and then it needed a mezuzah, even though his house presumably had a different entrance. Right? Not everybody walked through the Beit Midrash to get to his house. Anyway, this sugya is going to come up again in tomorrow's daf, not directly, but the commentaries are going to bring it up, because we're going to see this room with 4 entrances that actually need a mezuzah on all 4, and then it's very confusing. Don't we go by the regil? So the Gemara doesn't ask the question, but the commentaries do, and we'll make mention of it when we get to that. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Matna, Amar Shmuel. Another halakha quote in the name of Shmuel. We started with all these in Shmuel, now we're going to see more. Mitzvah lanicha b'tchilat shlish ha'elyon. It's a mitzvah to put the mezuzah, another custom we do, well, sort of, we're going to see, in the beginning of the top third. Okay? Sounds like measure your whole wall and put it at the beginning of the top third of your doorpost. Rav Huna amal magbia min hakarka tefach. You have to be at least a tefach off the floor. Marchik min hakora tefach. Make sure to put it far, right, distant, a tefach from the top beam. V'chol hapetach kulo kasher lemezuzah. And you can put a mezuzah anywhere you want. Okay, that we definitely don't do. We're going to see that we don't exactly do the way Shmuel says it there, and we'll see why in a minute. Meitive. So now we bring a difficulty against Shmuel from a braita. Magbiyah min hakarka tefach, u'merchik min hakora tefach. Okay, that sounds exactly like the second opinion we saw. V'chol hapetach kulo kasher lemezuzah, divrei Rav Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda, which completely, right, Rav Huna completely matches Rabbi Yehuda's position. But the second opinion here, we're going to see, doesn't exactly match with Shmuel, one to one. Rabbi Yossi Omer, ukshartam uchtavtam. Okay, they make the comparison of these 2 psukim that are right next to each other. Tie the tefillin and write the mezuzah. Mak shira begova, just like you tie your tefillin at height because you put it on your head. Av ktiva begova. Also, the ktavtam, the mezuzot, have to be at a height. So they have to be on the top part of the doorpost. So Bishlama Rav Huna hu damar ke Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so Rav Huna obviously matches Rabbi Yehuda. Ela l'shmuel damar keman. He doesn't really fit with either one, because what does he say? He doesn't say just it has to be high up. He says it has to be specifically at the bottom of the top third. So lo ke Rabbi Yehuda v'lo ke Rabbi Yossi, to which Amar Rav Huna berei de Rav Nachman la'olam ke Rabbi Yossi. Now really he holds like Rabbi Yossi. Umay tchilat shlish alyon dekamar, when he says the bottom of the top third, what does he really mean? Laharchika. He just means don't put it right at the very top. Put it at the top, but not at the very top. Lower it down a little bit from there. And basically it sounds like he's saying, you have up till the top third. You have the whole upper space, just not too close to the top and not anywhere below a third. So that could actually fit in, even though he wasn't as specific, Rabbi Yossi, but it could fit in with Rabbi Yossi's position. Some people even say that the tefillin, they're actually talking about the height of the tefillin shel yad. When you put it on your arm, you put it on the upper part of your arm, but you also don't put it right at the top. There's some connection there. I said it was the head, but it really is the tefillin shel yad that you put on your arm, and then we're talking about that they're higher up on your arm and not lower. Okay, Amar Rava. Okay, this we saw quoted before. It was just quoted because we were in the middle of a discussion. We were trying to say, why do you say that? Oh, because you might have thought maybe you could put it outside because of Rava. So now we're going to get to this directly. So Rava says you're supposed to put it in the part, the tefach, within a hand's breadth of the Reshut HaRabim, meaning in your doorpost. But if you have a very wide doorpost, make sure it's toward the Reshut HaRabim, toward the outside. My time, Rabbanan Amrei Kadesh Yifga b'mezuza. Okay, we want you to notice the mezuza. You're going to notice it if you're seeing it, right? When you're outside, you want it to be noticeable. Okay, and that you notice it right away when you get to your door. Rav Chanina Misura Amar Ki Hecha Detintere. He wants you to be protected. In other words, what does he say? Okay, the first thing I thought of when I read this is when you have an alarm. What do you call it in Hebrew? The galai, the I can't think of the word in English. Some of those words I just use more in Hebrew. The sensor, thank you. The sensor, right? You put a sensor outside your door, so you're going to put it, right, as far out as possible to basically get the protection right away. So the second somebody comes, right, the alarm is going to go off. So, okay. Oh, of course, you sometimes end up with birds and other things setting it off or things like that. But, right, you try to find the balance. But basically, you want that protection as early as possible. You want to avoid anything getting close to inside your house. So, what do they say here? They say, Rav Chanina Misura says you want that protection and you want it as far out as possible, right? You don't want anything now. What's the sakana? This goes back to what I said Alana talks about in her shir, right? Again, and we talked about this yesterday in class. So Rashi says, what are we worried about again? The mezikin. He's worried about evil spirits getting in. So block them, right? We're assuming the mezuzah works as a sensor. It blocks them from getting in. And therefore, keep it as far out as possible. The Rambam says anybody who thinks this is a complete idiot, and that's not the way, that's not what we're talking about here. And what does he say? He suggests that what we're talking about here is you want to see it as quickly as possible, right? First thing you see when you get into your house, and that's going to protect you from sinning, from, right, understanding the second you see the mezuzah, you remember God, you remember who you're supposed to be, and that affects your actions. And we want you to get that as soon as possible. So we're going to have it'll protect you because you won't waste a second of thinking the wrong things. So there's a very interesting machloket. Again, listen to Dini and Daf. She does a very good analysis and brings some other sources as well. Worthwhile listen. She also connects it with some sugyas we saw on Avodah Zarah, which is going to connect to the story we're going to see right now. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Bo re'eh shelo k'midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu midat basar v'dam. Okay, we had a story like this in Avodah Zarah also, so again, listen to Alana Shir, you'll see it. The way that God works is not the way other kings work, right? God is the King of Kings, and yet He doesn't work like a normal king works. Midat basar v'dam, a king normally, how does it work? Melech yoshem b'bifnim, the king sits inside. V'am shamrim oto mibachutz, and the nation protects him outside. Midat Kadosh Baruch Hu eino ken. God is not like that. Avadav yoshvim mibifnim. His servants sit inside. V'hu mishamram mibachutz, and He protects them from the outside. Shenemar Hashem shomrecha Hashem tzilcha yad yaminecha. Right, God is our protector. Okay, which by the way, there's a pasuk many people say when they kiss a mezuzah. Okay, right, when they come into a house and they say this pasuk, it comes from this sugya as well. Darash Rav Yosef b'rei derava mishmei derava. Okay, another halacha. Ha'emik la tefach psula. If you put your mezuzah, okay, I don't know if you've ever seen this. I've seen it where people etch they open up the stone in the wall a little, make a little, open it up, put the mezuzah inside the wall. You could do that, but not if it's a tefach into the wall. Okay, you can't put it all the way in, a tefach, a hand's breadth. Lema meseale. Now they're going to quote a braita, and we're going to start with our sugyo where we really get complicated in terms of what the reality is that they're discussing here. Lema meseale. Hinicha bepatzin, o shetala aleha malben, im yesham tefach, tzricha mezuza acheret, vim lav, ena tzricha mezuza acheret. They bring this source and they say, oh, this source sounds like it's saying the same thing. And then that would support, it's always nice to have a braita to support something an Gemara says. So what does it say here? If you put the mezuzah in the patzim are usually the doorposts, okay? Now, you put it in those doorposts, or you put bricks on top of where your mezuzah was, okay? Like you thicken the wall with bricks, the doorpost. Im yesh sham tefach, if it's the thickness of a tefach, then tzarich mezuza acheret. Then you have to put a different mezuzah. Okay, your mezuzah that's deep in the wall, a tefach, right, is not good. Or if you put it all the way into the wall, a tefach, it's no good. Fim lav. If not, if it's less than a tefach and you put bricks, around it or something, you thicken the wall with bricks, or you added you put it inside the wall less than a tefachim, and it's tzricha mezuza acheret. You don't need another mezuzah. So that sounds like a great support. To which the Gemara says, no, you completely misunderstood that case. Kitanya hi bepetach she'achorei hadelet. That is used for, okay, this could be very confusing because it doesn't really say very much. It's used for the opening that's behind the door. What on earth are they talking about? Good question. The commentaries have multiple ways of understanding this. Okay, there's pictures both in the Schottenstein, the art scroll, and also in the Koran. You can use those pictures to help you. Actually, I think that's what I found, so I'm just going to check. Yeah. So I'll go with the art scroll right now. They have a picture. I mean, it's either way. It's the same thing. They just put up, there's a south side and a west side. Okay, and they meet together in the corner. And there's an opening on both sides with one door. Okay, and there's basically in the corner, there's a post. And the door swivels on that post. And it basically can either close the south side or close the west side. So we have like a swinging door that could be used for one or the other. Now, if you're on the south side, okay, so the mezuzah is going to be on your right, and you have a mezuzah there, not on the post that's basically between the two. Okay, in a minute we're going to try to figure out how to get this from the words, but we'll get back to that. Forget the words right now in the Gemara. So you have this post. On the other side, you have the wall, right, which extends, and then there's an opening. So on the right of the south side, there's a mezuzah. What they're saying is you don't need a mezuzah on the other side, meaning on the post, which is going to be on the right side of the west side. Okay, if you're on the west side entrance, basically, if you want to put a mezuzah on your right, it'll be on that post. Well, you don't really need a post if there's one door, and it could either close the south or the west. And you have a mezuzah on the right of that south side. If that post, basically the corner post there, is less than a tefach wide, then we basically, the way I understood it anyway, I hope I understood it correctly, we view this as one door. Okay, there's basically one door, and you have a mezuzah covering it, even though, right, when you walk in from the west, you won't really see the mezuzah. But since it's so narrow, and maybe that's why you'll see the mezuzah, and it's one door, we basically view this as one thing. But as soon as that post is a tefach wide, that already requires a mezuzah for the west side. That's basically what this halacha is saying. Okay, if that post in between the two sides, again, this is one interpretation. This is Rashi's. That post is wide enough. You're going to need two mezuzahs there. So again, you're going to have one on the right side of the left, and you're going to have one on the right side of the west, and one of the right of the south. And that's one will be on that post, and one won't be on that post. Okay, that's the way we understand petach she'achorei hadelet. I guess it's called a petach she'achorei hadelet because when you close the door in the south, right, there's an opening on the other side. It's behind the door because the opening of the west is now behind the door. Okay, so that's the way the Gemara explains it, in which case this has absolutely nothing to do with our situation. Okay. So now the Gemara says, wait, if you want to say that braita is talking about a petach she'achorei hadelet, which has nothing to do with our topic, but that doesn't make any sense because look at that braita. The case that I just described to you, okay, that case is explicit in the Mishnah after it says petach she'achorei hadelet. Then it says im yesham tefach tzricha mezuza acheret v'im lav ena tzricha mezuza acheret. So it says, I think I skipped the first few words. Sorry, maybe I read it. I'm not even sure, but let me just read it again. It says so explicitly. If you have this entrance out behind the door, however we define it, but assuming we go with Rashi, okay, but we just said that's talking about petach shorchei adelet, even though it didn't say the word petach shorchei adelet. But then immediately after it says petach shorchei adelet. If it has a tefach, it needs a mezuzah. If it doesn't need another mezuzah. So how can you possibly say that the line before that said hinicha bepatzin o shetala aleh malbein im yesham tefach tzricha mezuzah acheret im la beinat tzricha mezuzah acheret? How can you say that means the tefach shachorei adelet? The petach shachorei adelet when it says it explicitly the next line? To which they say ketzad katani. No. The second line is defining the first. In other words, they gave this case, which was totally unclear what it meant. You put in the patzim, or shetalala malbein, or you put, oh, by the way, I didn't explain how we explained that, right? The way we explained it according to this Rashi interpretation, it means if you put it in the patzim, meaning you put the mezuzah on that south side on the right there, or talala malbein, or you put bricks to thicken that post there. If there's a tefach on, where you put the bricks, if you thickened it a tefach, or that whole post itself was a tefach, then you're going to need another mezuzah, okay? And basically, since that was an unclear line, the next line came to describe what it meant, okay? Which could be true, could be not. Anyway, that's the way they define it. The whole point was they were just trying to say this braita is not clearly coming as a support for the original halacha, which was just ha'emikla tefach. If you put it all the way inside the wall, or added a brick, and now the mezuzah is deep in a tefach, it's no good. Maybe you can use that braita to support, maybe you can't, it's unclear. Okay, Tana. Ha'emid la malbein shel kanim. What if you made a doorpost, you added to your doorpost a post made of reeds. Why reeds as opposed to wood? Because reeds you can hollow out, and if you hollow them out, what could you do? You could stick your mezuzah in it. So now we're going to get to this issue of ta'aseh v'lo menasui that we talked about before. Chotech shfoferet u'minicha. You can cut one of the reeds, create a hollow tube, and put it inside that tube. Rav Adda b'reida Rava lo shanu ela. This only works ela shehemid ulevasof chatach v'niach. If you already made it into your doorpost, the reeds, and then while it was as a doorpost, you cut it, hollowed it out, put your mezuzah inside. As again, you don't hollow it out; it is hollow, but meaning you open it so you could get to the inside, put it in. If you cut it, put it inside, and then put it up as your doorpost, that wouldn't work because again, you can't put up a mezuzah as you're creating the doorpost. You have to have a doorpost and then put your mezuzah, affix it to the doorpost, and not create your doorpost off, right? Assemble it and stick it on. Okay. So he says these petachs that are called shimai, which we don't know what they are exempt from mezuzah. So my pitrei shimai, not only we didn't understand it, someone later didn't understand it and asked. So plige bar Rav Rechumi ve'Abba Yossi. So they had a debate what this is. Chad amar deleit lehu tikra, chad amar deleit lehu shkufe. One says it has no roof. One says or no ceiling. One says it has no doorposts. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, first of all, to have a mezuzah, you need doorposts and a ceiling. So what they seem to say is shimai means broken. What they mean is if you take, let's say, a wall, a stone wall, and you push out the stones and you break them and you create, let's say, like an arch. Okay, that's the most easiest way to see it. So what they mean here is if it's not straight and you have, again, there's different interpretations here, and you have stones jutting out of all sorts of places, either, and that's the machloket here, is the pitrei shimai, does it mean that there's kind of a broken or not really very nice looking wall with things jutting out all over on the top part, or is it on the side parts? And that's the machloket. But what it means is things aren't straight, okay, and really not straight. I don't think they mean a little bit off, right? Like the way, when did some construction, things are always a little off and there's angled things out. We don't mean that. We mean really noticeably not built nicely. So then you're not chayav b'mezuzah. But again, there's a debate which part of it. Amar Rabbi Bar Shila, Amar Rav Chisda, Ach sadra p'tura min hamezuzah, lefi she'en la pitzimin. Sadra is a portico. What it basically means is 3 walls, totally open on the third side. So you don't need a mezuzah because it has no posts, because it's just open, right? Post usually means, right, there's a frame. There's no frame here. Now, theoretically, you could say there's sort of a frame because there's a ceiling and there's three sides, but the opening is just like an opening. It's not really like an entranceway. Okay? It doesn't have any of these pitzimim, which are really doorposts. So now they say, wait, it sounds like from what Rav Chisda is saying, hayesh la pitzimin chayevet. If you put up posts on the edges of those two sides where it's open, right, like the walls coming out of the other sides, and you were to put up a post there, it sounds like you'd be chayav and mezuzah. But how could that possibly be? Because if anyone, now again, you have to understand the reality here, which is a little difficult for us to understand, but if you were to put a post there, they wouldn't be for a doorpost because that whole side is just open. You don't need a doorpost when it's just an open space. So those posts would only be to hold up the ceiling. That would be the only reason why you would do it. They're meant for holding up the ceiling. So then you wouldn't be chayav mezuzah. So why does it seem to imply, because it doesn't have tzimim, but if it did have tzimim, then you would need to, but the tzimim would only be for supporting the ceiling. So, hachikama, they read Rav Chisda like this. So now they read it to suit what they think, which is, even if it doesn't have tzimim, it's exempt because tzimim are only meant for supporting the ceiling. Amar Abaye, and Abaye is going to say the same thing. Chazina leilis blide de beimar ta'avele petzime ve'leitlu mezuzta. Okay, we saw this blide of mar, which seemed to be some sort of portico here, which had petzimin, and there was no mezuzah, and there you have it. Okay, de kasavar, he must have held the chizuk tikrau davide. He must have thought that this is blide, okay, whatever exactly it is, but that the petzimim that were there were supporting the ceiling. Meitive. Now they say, wait a minute. If an achsadra is exempt from a mezuzah, we're going to have a problem because meitive bechar achsadra merpeset chayavim b'mezuzah. So it says in a Tanaitic source that these actually, the commentaries say that it's chayav only midorabanan, but if you have a gatehouse, which is like a little thing where a guard sits, which is like, again, an arched doorway, where inside that one guard sits, protecting some space. We'll talk about a bechar soon. And an achsadra, which is what we're talking about, and a merpeset, which the way they explain, that's really like a porch. It seems to be a porch that leads, like if you live in the upstairs and there's someone else who lives in the upstairs next door to you, you could get there from the merpeset, from one to the other, so it's kind of used for entrances into houses, but no one really lives in the merpeset, but you also need a mezuzah there. So what do they answer? Ba'achsadra de Bei Rav. The achsadra Bei Rav needed a mezuzah, but not this achsadra. They're not a regular achsadra. What's unique about the achsadra Bei Rav? So they seem to think it has walls that didn't reach the ceiling. So it was more had walls rather than, it was more of a serious structure rather than a typical portico, which wasn't really used as a room so much. So then they say, Achsadra de Bei Rav, kindruna ma'al yatau. You can't use his as an example. That wasn't a portico at all. It was a portico. Technically, it was called a portico, achsadra. But it wasn't really. It was really like a room. Of course, that's why you need a mezuzah. We don't need a Tanaitic source to tell us that. So they say, okay, let's say something else then. B'achsadra romiyata. Okay, you can look in the Koran this time. They have good pictures. Again, what exactly the reality is debatable. But an achsadra rumiyata is a Roman portico, which is completely open with a little strip at the bottom, like very low, as opposed to Rav's achsadra, which had walls that went up high enough that they were 10 tefachim, which if you remember from Sukkah, that means a wall. These are much lower, but there's a wall around the sides with an entranceway on, right? So again, most of it's open, but there's this small, low wall, and because of that, it needs a mezuzah. Okay, that's what they say. Amar Rachba, like I said, it's a little hard to understand because we don't really know the reality. We're going to get into more of that right now. Amar Rachba, Amar Rav Yehuda, Beharziki, Chayav b'shtei mezuzot. Okay, this place needs two mezuzot. My Beit Harziki. What on earth is Beit Harziki? Okay, you can, again, in the Koran, they have two different pictures based on different interpretations here. Amra Papa Saba Mishmei de Rav, Beit Shar hapatuach lechatzir ubaim batim ptuchim lebeit shar. Okay, we have a Beit Shar that opens up, so we have this gatehouse, which opens up both into a courtyard and into houses. Okay, so we need a mezuzah on the part that opens up into houses and the part that opens up into the courtyard, because a courtyard is somewhat like a living space. Even though it's open, people did all sorts of things in there, and that we need a mezuzah as well. As opposed to, we're going to see in a minute, a gina. A garden doesn't need a mezuzah. But if you have this gatehouse that opens up in two areas, we assume the gatehouse is serving both areas and protecting both areas, and they're both housing spaces, so you're going to need a mezuzah on each one. Now we're going to get into our final case for today. Tanu Rabanan Beit Shara Patuach Legina Ulekitonit. We have a gatehouse which opens up into both a garden on one side and a little room, like a room for one person to sleep on the other side. Rabbi Yossi Amar Nidon Kitonit. Now, what do we treat this gatehouse as? Meaning the entrance from the gatehouse into the house, or the entrance of the gatehouse into the garden, does it need a mezuza? We say the gatehouse is like a kitonit. It's serving the room, and therefore it's going to need a mezuza. We don't exactly know what this means yet. Hold off. Chachamim omrim nidon kebeit shar. No, it's really like a gatehouse that doesn't really need a mezuzah. Some people actually say, isn't the whole question, does a gatehouse need a mezuzah? Some people say, right, that it really means it's like air, meaning it doesn't need a mezuzah. So now we're going to have a machloket of Amoraim, how to understand the Tanaitic debate. We're going to have Rav and Shmuel on one hand, Rav and Rav Yosef on the other, then we're even going to end with a psak halacha on this issue. So Rav and Shmuel, Amrit Travayu, they both say, Migina labayit, okay, now, from the garden to the house. This is where it gets complicated. Nobody's going from the garden to the house. People are going from the garden to the gatehouse to the house. But if we go, again, I'm going to just go with one interpretation here. The Koren, Steinsaltz had a much simpler interpretation, so I'm going to go with that. If we go from the garden to the house, meaning from the garden through the gatehouse to the house, meaning, do you need a mezuzah from the gatehouse into that little room, that house? Of course you do. Okay, that seems pretty obvious. Someone's sleeping in there. That, there's no machloket tanaim. The machloket tanaim is, okay, my time, okay, that's going into the house. Of course you need a mezuzah. Ki pligi mi bayit legina. When you go from the house into the garden, meaning through the gatehouse, then to the garden, mar savar kitonit ikar, umar savar gina ikar. The question is, and it's really the way I understood it, is when you're going from the garden into the gatehouse and then from there into the house, is the main thing in this whole area with these three spaces the house, the room, or is the main thing the garden? Okay, is the garden serving the room, meaning like there's a guy living there and has a nice garden? Or is the garden serving the house? Meaning, why is he sleeping there? Maybe it's for the guard to sleep when he watches the garden. Okay, so which is key? So, if you say that the house is what's important there, well then even when you leave the garden to go into the gatehouse, you're going to need a mezuzah, because that's basically ultimately leading to the house. If you say that the garden is what's important, then you don't need a mezuzah going into the garden, because you don't need a mezuzah going into the garden. You don't need a mezuzah going out to the gatehouse, because the gatehouse is really just serving the garden. The room just happens to be there, and maybe the room is important for the garden, but not because it's a room. So yes, of course, when you go from the gatehouse into the room, you're going to need a mezuzah, but not when you go from the garden into the gatehouse. The gatehouse just really serves the garden. Rav Adda Rav Yosef to Amrit Travayu mibayit legina kol yamalo pligi de patur. He's going to say the same thing, but moving it over, meaning, not the same thing, but different, but we're just kind of moving over one step. Nobody thinks that you're going to need a mezuzah between the garden and the gatehouse. Of course you don't need a mezuzah. It's to a garden, okay? And to the gatehouse, you don't need a mezuzah. But, right, my time, petra diginahu. It's just an entrance to the garden. No mezuzah required. Ki pligi migina labayit. The machloket is, do you need, when you go out of the garden, though, toward the house, do you need a mezuzah there? Mar savar biyad bayitu. Right? That one holds, yeah, because you're going into a house, you need a mezuzah. Umar savar kula data diginahu davide. No, the house isn't even important enough for a mezuzah because it's just serving the garden. And gardens don't need mezuzah, so you don't even need a mezuzah going into the house. Abai v'Rav Adda Rav Yosef, and didn't require a mezuzah there. And Rav Ashi avi Rav Shmuel lechumra. But Rav Ashi, or at least Abai and Rav understood the machloket Rav Rav Yosef. We don't know what they really said about whether, right, because there's two opinions there. But Rav Ashi avi Rav Shmuel and lechumra. Basically, they required a mezuzah everywhere. Okay, both in the garden and into the house. We pass like Rav and Shmuel lechumra. Okay, so what did we do today? Just to review, we started with these halachot of Shmuel about where to put your mezuzah. How could you put it up on two different sheets? You know, could it be on two different parchments, or at least two with a big column in the middle? Two big columns. We go by, right, when you have two rooms, how do you know which one? We got into the horizontal, vertical, which way do we do it, how we got to the angle. Rabbi Zera said you have to put it right, the height of it, where you put it. Rabbi Zera said in the name of Shmuel, basically put it on the top third, but the bottom of the top third, which then we said really means anywhere on the top third, other than the other opinion that said you really could put it anywhere as long as it's not too high, too low. Then we got to where you put it, because we want to put it as far out as possible to protect you. We talked about the different opinions about protection and the different ways that God is different from other kings. From there, we got to deep into the wall, and then we had that source that could have supported it. In the end, we rejected it. We did the broken entrance does not require mezuzah. Achsadra doesn't need a mezuzah. What about the source that said it did? And from there, we got to the Beit Shar in these cases of entrances that lead, like a gatehouse that leads to two different places. And we had two cases there on what the halacha is, or what the machloket about what the halacha is in some of the cases. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Shvat Shalom.